Welcome back, everyone, to All About the Sound, Making Learning English Easier with the 3P approach. And we've covered so far phonemic and phonological awareness. Before we move on to phonics, however, when we start visualizing and using graphemes and together with what we're hearing, I want to go back to what we're hearing. It is so important to master what we're hearing first. If we really want to get the English language and understand it clearly, it's best to start with the sound. Okay, so even if you've learned English through sight recognition and through other ways other than phonemic and phonological awareness, I still want to make sure that at this point in our juncture, we are gathering how important it is to understand those phonemes. English speakers like myself, who have learned English in a variety of ways other than phonemic, phonological awareness, and phonics, often have a hard time pronouncing single phonemes when we're trying to teach someone how to say something. We've built unhealthy habits, unwholesome habits that get in the way of us communicating clearly those phonemes so someone can understand and later represent them correctly in writing. So I want to go back and make sure that you and I, myself just as much as you, because I am guilty of making those mistakes, understand how to articulate these phonemes, how to make those sounds clearly and correctly. And away we go. I think you may have noticed by now that English can be confusing. And there's many reasons why this language can have a tendency to confuse us with its many phonemes. It can even be it's especially confusing for those of us who have for years relied on graphemes over phonemes, who have learned, say, to read English by sight recognition rather than phonemic awareness or phonological awareness. So if we've been more concerned about the graphemes, we're going to have a hard time when it comes to the phonemes. If we are more into sight recognition, we're going to have a hard time when it comes to hearing and representing the sounds we're hearing. So it is so important that we begin with phonemic and phonological awareness before proceeding to phonics. If you're very new to English and you're just now learning it through the 3P approach, you are much better off than someone like me, for example, who still is very visual in her learning of English. In some ways, you're better off if you're new to English, have not yet been heavily influenced by what you see in terms of graphemes and sight recognition. Beginning your language learning journey with the 3P approach, then, is a much, much better way to eliminate much of the confusion that can later result. English does not have to be confusing. So even if you are someone who has learned through sight recognition, this review on phonemes and a return to the 3P approach may help you to rid some of the confusion you may be experiencing. So let's get rid of some of that confusion, shall we? How do we get rid of the confusion? We build phonemic and phonological awareness before we build on phonics. We focus on the phonemes, the sounds we're hearing, before we begin to focus on the graphemes, the letters we are seeing that represent those sounds. Phonemes before graphemes, phonemic and phonological awareness before phonics. So let's focus on mastering the use of phonemes before we're mastering the use of the grapheme. We're going to recognize phonemes when we hear them. We're going to practice recognizing the phonemes that we hear. We're going to learn to pronounce them correctly, and that is for everyone, even English speakers like myself who have been speaking this language for a long time. I still sometimes incorrectly pronounce my phonemes. I have picked up the Miramichi dialect, the place that I'm from, and it is a dialect that is not always proper in its pronunciation of phonemes. And I tend to also visualize, even in the written word or the phonetic notation of the word, a word instead of just listening to the sounds. So I will tend to, when it comes to pronouncing those sounds, sometimes pronounce them incorrectly. So even lifelong learners, lifelong speakers like myself will make mistakes. So don't beat yourself up if you have. On review, I even see the very common mistakes I tend to make in some of these videos I have given to you when it comes to pronouncing certain individual phonemes. When I recognized the mistakes I made, I was flabbergasted and concerned that I was adding more confusion possibly to your learning of English. So that's what this particular review is for, to correct the mistakes I might have made on some of the videos and to ensure that you are getting the right phonemic awareness by hearing the sounds coming out of the speaker's mouth correctly. I'm hoping you will get to the point someday where you will become so phonemically aware, so phonologically aware, that you'll be able to recognize the incorrect use of phonemes in the speakers you are hearing. Hopefully you were able to recognize when I wasn't pronouncing some of those phonemes correctly in the previous videos. So I cannot stress enough the importance of focusing on phonemes rather than graphemes. Phonemes are the sounds we're hearing in the written or spoken word, and graphemes are what we're seeing, the letter representation that we're seeing. That letter representation is our alphabet. So I have not yet introduced you to the alphabet because that belongs to the compartment of phonics. And we're focusing on phonemic and phonological awareness, just on the sounds up to this point. Okay? I'm showing you, however, the Roman or Latin alphabet that the English-speaking language uses, only because I want to show you how we tend to make mistakes in comparing the letters that we're seeing and reciting when we say the alphabet with what those sounds are that these letters are supposed to be representing in words. They don't always match, okay? So when you see a B, for example, in a word, it's not pronounced B, okay? It's pronounced B, B. So that is what gets confusing. And so we will often tend to take our letter sound that we hear when we're reciting the alphabet into our words, instead of the actual phoneme, which would be represented by a phonetic symbol according to the IPA. Okay, so that being said, sometimes by reciting the alphabet to learn our alphabet, we will develop some confusion with the phonemes that we're seeing in words. Okay, the sounds the letters are making, the letters of the alphabet are making when we're reciting them are not the same as the representation, the sound that those letters are supposed to be representing in words. Okay, so that is where the confusion comes in. I'm going to recite this alphabet to you, and I want you to listen. Okay, listen only to the sounds I'm making. You will see that I am really lengthening those sounds. I'm adding extra phonemes to this, every letter of the alphabet that I'm reciting, that I will never use in my words when I'm using them as phonemes, as something to represent a phoneme, as a grapheme. Okay, so let's just listen for now. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z. Wow, that's a lot of sounds. Let's move on. So this is the phoneme chart, the sounds we're hearing. The chart in the previous slide was the alphabet, the letters of the alphabet we'll be using when we're spelling out words. Unfortunately, when we recite the alphabet, the sounds we're hearing are going to be different than the sounds we'll be hearing when we recite the phoneme chart. So that's why it gets so confusing, and I'm going to go into more detail on that in a minute. For now, let's look at the IPA chart, and I'm going to get you to go back to that site I gave you in the first PowerPoint to make sure that you are listening and hearing the sounds correctly. Okay, so you can go back to that chart and press on the sounds, and you will hear the way they should be spoken rather than the way speakers like myself may occasionally speak them. So on this chart, we see that there are 6 rows. The first 6 rows belong to the vowel sounds, the heart of the word. The next 3 rows belong to the consonants, the wall structures of words. Okay? Now, you will see there are 2 shadings in the top 3 rows, dividing it into columns. And the first 4 columns are our monophthongs. Our monophthongs are one sound, the vowel that makes one sound, one movement of the mouth. In the next 3 columns, you will see that there are our diphthongs. Diphthongs make 2 sounds, one sound sliding or gliding into another sound. Okay? So it's a combination of monophthongs. It's more than one monophthong in each diphthong to make that sound. Okay? So those are our vowels on top, and those are our consonants on the bottom. For this PowerPoint presentation, we're going to be focusing mostly on our vowel sounds, okay? With a little bit of explanation into the mistakes we can make, common mistakes we might make in pronouncing our consonants, but we're really focusing on articulating the vowel sounds, okay? So let's move on. So it's very important to know that the sounds made by letters when we are reciting the alphabet, that means when we're saying A, B, C, D, E, F, G, are not the same as their phonemes when represented or used in words, okay? They're not matching. We change the sound of the letter when we recite it in the alphabet. We make it longer and add extra phonemes to it. Okay, I'm just going to give you a couple of them to show you. With the exception of the vowel sounds, which are all long vowels, that means that they say their own name. When I look at an A, I know I'm going to say A. Okay, I'm going to see the same phonetic notation for A matching the letter that I'm looking at. Okay, when I recite the alphabet. But that letter A in a word could have all different sounds attached to it. Okay, it could be represented by it could be representing a whole different bunch of phonemes. So that's why we have to be cautious. But with the exception of our vowel sounds, which will say their name, which will have just the one phoneme to say them, most of the letters of the alphabet will add an extra at least one extra phoneme to make that sound longer. Okay, so it's usually 2 phonemes making up a letter that we're reciting in the alphabet rather than the one sound they would represent in a word. Is that clear? Okay. Let's look at B, for example. So B, for example, is pronounced B. So I'm hearing 2 sounds, right? 2 phonemes. I hear the p, p, p And I also hear the E, 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 E. I don't mean to be puncturing like that. B, B. When really, that B, if we see it in most words, is just going to be P, P. Okay? But we tend to overpronounce it. Let's go down to the G of the alphabet. When we pronounce or recite the alphabet, we say G. And I'm hearing two sounds. I'm hearing the ch, ch, and the E, E, G. But when I see G in a word, I often pronounce G, K, 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 gone. Okay? So I'm changing the sound altogether when I say it in the alphabet. I also want to look at queen, or Q for queen, okay? You'll see that there's 3 phonemes in that Q when we say Q. We hear K, sh, U, okay? K, U. So there's 3 sounds in there. And if we go over to the W, we'll actually see that there are many sounds in there, right? W takes a lot of phonemes to get that word out, W. So that's why I want you to be cautious that words, that when we're reciting the letters of the alphabet, they don't match what the letters might be representing in a word. And sometimes, if we're so focused on the alphabet and seeing it, we may add those extra sounds into our words. And that's why we get confused. So I just wanted to show you that alphabet for that reason. We're going to go back to the sounds. Another common confusing letter that makes a different sound is the H sound. When we see H in a word, it can often be silent. We won't hear it at all, or it could have a sound. Sound. But when we pronounce the letter H, we're hearing almost like an 8 in there, followed by sound. So we're hearing H, H, H. So that can get confusing as well. I just wanted to pass that one on. So the letters of the alphabet then, when we recite them, do not always match the sound these graphemes represent in words, and this can lead to confusion, okay? We may tend to visualize the spelling of the word instead of listening for the sound. If we're more phonic oriented or more grapheme oriented or more sight recognition oriented, we will be trying to visualize the spelling of the word instead of listening for the sounds, and that visualization can get in the way of us actually hearing these phonemes and mastering phonemic and phonological awareness. We may add those extra phonemes used in reciting the alphabet into the phonetic understanding of the word. So when I see a D, I might want to say D, D, right, in dad. But there's no E in dad. Sound is there? There's just da, t, right? And again, I just added the again, which I am notorious for, and I'm doing my best trying not to. This will confuse us. Many English speakers, me included, will add those extra sounds out of habit, and that will make it challenging for others to hear what is being said clearly enough to understand and represent that word correctly in writing. So when I just said dad, and I was spelling it out for you or sounding it out for you, I went da, da, da. So you might hear the d, which is all D is. It's d, 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 d. And I keep adding that to it because it's so habitual for me. Duh. It's not duh. The D sound does not make duh. It makes d, 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 d. Add, right? So we have to be very careful to clip those R's at the end. But so I'm hoping you will recognize when I'm saying when I add a to especially D and T and P and those letters like that and B that tend to have stop plosives to them. So they tend to make that easier to add that So we got to be very careful of that So let's look at what happens. One of the most common mistakes is adding the extra sound or syllable. One of the most common mistakes made when we focus on phonics over phonemic awareness or phonological awareness is that we might add an extra sound to our word. And that sound is Many times we will add this extra ah or the schwa, and that's what the sound is. It's the schwa e, and you'll see it represented phonetically as an upside down e in your phonetic notation. That makes the sound. So we might end up pronouncing the B as B. When I'm trying to show you, say, bat, and I'm trying to spell it out for you, I might say B, A, B, at. Okay? B, at. And so you're hearing that sound in there. And I added the T as well, and T can be T. D can be D. Duh, and I did that in the previous slide when I was doing the dad, because it's just so habitual for me. I would have said duh, dad, you know, that duh, you're hearing the sound in there instead of just clipping it off with d, ad. I said duh, ad, right? So I hear two vowel sounds. I hear the sound in close to the D, and I hear the sound close to the other D. So I am actually making a mess of that word. We add an extra phoneme to B, and B might become B. If I'm trying to say ball, B, ball, but you're hearing not only the from the second part of that word, you're hearing now the in the first part of that word, so it looks like two syllables. And T can become T. So B often becomes B, P often becomes P, T often becomes T, D often becomes D, and we might add the extra phoneme, so B becomes B, T becomes Ta, and you can see in the phonetic notation how that changes the phonetic notation, and if it changes the phonetic notation, it's changing the way we're perceiving the word. So we've got to be careful about that. Each vowel sound, remember, is a syllable. So when I add that extra which is a vowel sound, I'm creating an extra syllable. And that's going to cause a host of problems in your understanding of English. And we're really careful about this with young kids. Or we try to be. I'm goofing up all the time, but we try to be very careful about not attaching that to these consonants when we're teaching new English speakers to speak. We need to learn to strip the baggage, the phoneme of this extra baggage, these extra sounds that we add to them. So we need to learn to remove those sounds, to clip the vowel sound off where it's supposed to be clipped. Instead of elongating it by adding something, we got to start clipping and stripping. Okay, so we'll go on to that. Before we do that, we're going to look at some words and see how this gets confusing in the long run, okay? We're going to look at bat. Bat. Now, if I were to sound out each sound in that word the correct way, it should just be b, at, b, at, b, at, okay? I am not adding that extra but, at, okay, as I do in the incorrect notation at the bottom. There is only 3 phonemes, 3 sounds in bat, right? And that makes 1 syllable. But if I pronounce it incorrectly by adding that sound, by saying at, and you see that I added the schwa e to that, then I've created 2 syllables. The B and the schwa e become 1 syllable, and the a sound and the t sound become the second syllable. So we got to be very cautious with that. Let's look at puck. I had to show you hockey puck if you're in Canada, but the correct spelling is just 3 sounds, 3 phonemes. So it should be puck, puck, puck. But even now when I'm saying it, I recognize I'm adding somewhat of a to the end of that. It's puck, puck, puck. And I did it automatically, did it incorrectly by adding that extra But we have to be careful that there's only 3 phonemes we're hearing. We're hearing the p, the and the k, okay? And the incorrect way, we'd be adding that schwa e, and that adds an extra syllable for an extra phoneme, an extra syllable. Let's look at pop, pop. Now, if I were to sound that out, I might say pop, incorrectly, I might say pop, 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 pop. I'm adding a sound to the first P and an out sound to the second P. And that's not how I gave it 2 extra phonemes that time. We don't want to do that. It's p, p, pop. Okay. It's not the pop, which we tend to do if we're sounding it out. So that's why we got to be careful. So we really need to be cautious of how we're speaking and be mindful of that tendency. And I have to be especially very mindful of it because I do have a tendency of doing that, especially when I'm trying to enunciate a word for the speaker or for another speaker or listener. So enunciate the phoneme. So I do have a tendency to add that So we need to be mindful of our sounds and the way we're pronouncing them. Then we need to stop the sound before the is added. And this is called clipping. So we're going to clip it. We're going to pull it back a little bit. Instead of that tendency to want to elongate the word, we're going to pull it back and make it shorter. And one way to work, for example, with the plosives, B and P, is to imagine blowing a feather off your lips. So you have a little feather on your lips and you can hold a piece of paper in front of you to see which one blows. And then you're trying to blow the P, the P, and that's blowing the P off. And if I notice when I do that and I had the piece of paper in front of me, that paper's going to move and you can try it for yourself. Whereas with the B, I'm not moving it, okay? So we're going to be careful with these phonemes when we're looking at a word especially and we see these letters and how we're pronouncing them, okay? So the B often incorrectly gets pronounced as b, but instead of a clean p, 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 p. I'm doing it again because I want to go ba. D incorrectly pronounced d instead of a clean t, 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 t. Pull it back. T incorrectly pronounced t instead of a clean t, t, t. P incorrectly pronounced p instead of a clean p, 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 p. M incorrectly pronounced m instead of a clean m, m, m. S incorrectly pronounced s instead of a clean s, s. L incorrectly, and I'm terrible with this one, l instead of a clean l, l, l. R incorrectly pronounced r instead of a clean r, r. N incorrectly pronounced n, n instead of a clean n. Y often mistakenly pronounced as ya instead of a clean n, y. Okay. So for the rest of this presentation then, we're going to focus on articulating, which means making vowel sounds, how they're made in English, and what parts of the mouth are used, and it's usually the tongue, and it depends on how far or high up the tongue is, and if it's forward or back, or in the front or the back or in the midway, and it also depends on the roundness of our mouth. But let's go and have a look at articulating vowel sounds. So we need to know how to describe the articulation of those vowel sounds, describe how the vowel sounds are made. And there's 3 ways that we can do this. We can use something called height, we can use something called backness, or we could use something called roundness. And it's all referring to the muscles of the mouth and how they work, namely the tongue. So when I'm talking about height, I'm referring to how high up the tongue is and how close it is to the roof of the mouth. The higher the tongue is, the more closed that sound will be. And when I say low, how far away from the roof of the mouth is the tongue is how open the mouth is. Okay, so if I say the word sheep, I'm using that E sound, which is one of the first vowel sounds we'll hear in our chart, our phonetic chart, we'll see in the mouth chart, is E as in sheep. My tongue is high, my mouth is closed. When I say as in cat, my mouth is open because the tongue is lowered away from the roof of the mouth. I can also use something called backness or frontness, but we tend to say backwardness. How far back is the tongue, both the tip and the blade when I'm speaking? Is it pulled back or is it forward? When I say, again, going to the E and C, I know that the tongue is forward. So is the I and sit. Those two bring the tongue forward. When I say the oo in boot, the tongue is back. When I say ah in pot, the tongue is back. Another way we can describe those articulations is through the roundness of the lips. How round is the lips? When I say that ooh again in boot, the lips are rounded. Ooh. When I say the I and pig, the lips are spread out and they're not rounded, okay? If I say the E in green, the lips are not rounded. Green, they're spread out. Does that make sense? I hope so. So what you're seeing here is the Canadian English vowel phoneme chart, which may be different than the American or the UK chart. What we see on this chart is, if you could imagine that chart being placed over the mouth, we see the little slant going downward being going in towards the throat, okay, and the front of the mouth, and the back, think of the uvula on the back, that little punching bag in the back is where the back goes. So we have two ways of identifying our sound using this chart. We have high, mid, low, referring to how high that tongue is, referring to the height, and we also have front, central, back, referring how far back, the backness of the tongue. And we'll also use roundness in that, but that's actually not monitored on the chart. So if I go through my vowel sounds and I see two vowel sounds, I see the E, which is the first one I see, and then I see the I. They are both high and closed because the mouth is closing, and they are front. The tongue is forward and towards the front, okay? If I move down my chart to the A again in the low section, the tongue is low and the tongue is also forward, okay? And then you'll see in the back, if I go back to that oo sound again, the tongue is back. It's still high, so the mouth is somewhat closed, okay? And then some of the other sounds are allowed to a more of an open sound. And we'll get back to this chart as we pronounce each phoneme, but for now I just want to show you what it looked like. So let's divide our vowel sounds into our monophthongs and our diphthongs. Our monophthongs only make one sound, okay? And then we'll see those in the first several columns of our chart. Monophthongs are our short vowel sounds. They do not say their name, but make a sound different than the grapheme recited in the alphabet does. So let's look at some of them. We'll look at E as in cat. We'll look at R as in car or as in ball. We can look at E as in green. E as in red. As in fur or bird. E as in jet. We can look at I as in pig. We can look at A as in cot. We can look at or as in horse. We can look at oo as in put, oo, or should, ood, should. We can look at oo as in blue, and we can look at as in hut. Or we can look at the schwa e that would be in many syllables, and it makes the sound. And we'll talk about schwa later on. So let's look at this phoneme chart again, using the Canadian phonemes, which may differ from the UK phonemes and the US phonemes. That's why I always say around 14 monophthongs rather than the 12 that the others would describe, because we tend to borrow from the States and we borrow from the UK, so we may have both or one or the other in our phoneme list. So this one we're going to look at, again, we're going to go back to the front where the tongue is in the front. and the tongue is high. So you can imagine the very roof of your mouth coming this way. This is what it would look like. Okay, and back here the straight line is to where the uvula is, and then it comes across, and then we have that slant coming down here. So in the front, the first phoneme I'm hearing is E. E. Try that. E. Tongue is high, mouth is closed, okay? And and it's toward the tongue is high and towards the front, and the mouth is closed. The next phoneme we're seeing is the I phoneme, as in pig. Pig. I. I. Again, the tongue is high towards the roof of the mouth. It is forward towards the front of the mouth. The mouth is closed, therefore we're not seeing that rounding of the lips. As we move down, we're going to see the E, the sound, as in jet sound, and as in hen sound. Now these two sounds are very, very similar, and it's hard to pick out the distinction between them, but they are different sounds, different phonemes. As in hen, and the next one would be the ed we hear in bed. Okay, those are two different S sounds, okay, we're hearing with those ones. And these are mid, the tongue is mid, upward, not quite touching the back of up towards the roof of the mouth, it's midway, and it is in the front of the mouth for both of these. The next two phonemes we see are the as in cat, cat, and we also see the sound as in the. So those are two phonemes we're seeing there. Tongue is low, and it's towards, probably more to the center of the mouth as the mouth kind of drops off there. Now we're going to go to the central. Now this is Canadian, so you'll see that they have the sound, the sound that we'd see in hut in the central there, but I'm going to move it over towards the back. Okay, in Canadian we say it a little differently, and that's why we get our Canadian rising. The sound you're seeing there is with this, looks like a sed with the colon, is the sound, as we see in bird, or or inferred, fur bird. And then and that is when the tongue is central and it's midway. Okay. So we're going to begin to have rounding of the mouth here, but not a lot of rounding. Get most of the rounding in the back, when the tongue is in the back. So we're going to look up at back high, and we see the oo sound, or the u sound you might see in blue, oo, oo, oo. You see the rounding of the mouth here, oo, oo, oo. Tongue is back, and it's high. And the next sound you're seeing is the sound we see in wood, ood. Okay, and that's what that symbol represents. So when we're coming down to the next set of symbols, we are going to have the tongue midway and in the back. So mouth is still rounded with this one. So we see the symbol for the for hut, and we see the symbol for car there, as well as the symbol represented by the O-like character. At the very bottom, in the low, when the tongue is low in the back, and we're not really having rounding here, but we do have an open mouth, because the lower we get, the more open the mouth is. You will see the olive, that sound coming through. Very good. So let's look at those phoneme sounds, and I've given you both the mouth chart and the phonemic alphabet chart, and we know the first 3 rows are our vowel sounds, and we're focusing only on the vowel sounds, especially the monophthong sounds, because the diphthongs are just 2 monophthongs that make one sound, so we won't necessarily see their symbols over in the mouth chart. So as I say the word, I want the sound, I want you to try to find it on the mouth chart to see where it will be according to how high the tongue will be, and how far forward or backward the tongue will be, and if the lips are rounded. And you watch my mouth as I say these sounds. So the first sound on the phoneme alphabet chart is E. E, as in see. The next one is I, as in it or sit. Then you have as in book. Then you'll have ooh, as in two. The next monophthong is the and we could see a different symbol for that one. Sometimes we'll see the funny sed, the written cursive sed, and it is for men. Men, The next one beside that is the schwa e that makes the sound, and we'll see it mostly when we have primary or secondary stress. It doesn't belong to a particular word, so we'll get back to that one later. The next one you're seeing is an R-controlled phoneme, and that is The next one is another R-controlled phoneme, and it's or, sort, horse, or. Now on that bottom row, we will see the sound for cat, bad, Then we see the next one, that little teepee-like shaped one, is the oo or the input. Ut. Then we have the another R-controlled one, R as in car, part, or also in ball, okay? And then we have that backwards A, which is a sound as in pot. And I would probably add two of those that are not there, only because we borrow, in Canada, we borrow from the UK and the US, so we may see two extra phonemes in there. That's why I always say there's 14 vowel phonemes, monophthongs, as opposed to the 12 that you will find on this chart. Now, that's it for now. Let's move on. Whereas the monophthongs are one sound, and we see those on the chart, the diphthongs, we don't necessarily see them on the phonemic chart, but not on that phonetic and pronunciation chart that I just showed you. And they make two sounds, right? They're two monophthongs coming together basically to make a sound, and we see a gliding motion of the tongue from one to the other. Let's look at some of those. We'll see that the pronunciation is different in the US and the UK. That's why I add the extra phonemes. So we see the O sound in boat and flow, and this will sometimes be changed to ow in Canadian uprising, okay? So the O in boat and flow, we see the symbols for that. And then we see the A, this is a long A sound, and we see that in gray, both spellings. Then we see, this is a little different. It's a little take on the or sound, and it's a like a tor, or insure. So it's I can't pronounce it by itself, sorry, without making a mistake. Then we see this symbol for oi, as in boy, and oil, oi. Then we see the long I sound. Long I sound is an I, high, white. And then we see the ow sound as in out, hour, now. We see the sound as in care, We see the ear sound as in year and series. So it's obvious then that when we're pronouncing our words, we need some practice. Even us English speakers have to be mindful of the mistakes we commonly make and need to keep practicing, especially when we say each individual phoneme for another to hear, that makes sure that we say it correctly. And we also have to be able to listen and distinguish those sounds. So we need practice in articulating each sound, which is making those sounds, And we need practice in listening to and distinguishing each sound that we're hearing. We need to watch for those common mistakes made, and a very common one is to add the which would add another phoneme to a word and also another syllable because it is a vowel sound. And we need to practice with our vowels first. So I'm going to encourage you to go back to your IPA charts and practice both articulating those words and hearing them. Okay? So we've covered that today, and next time we're going to go on to helping out, the practice in articulating sounds that come from consonants. And that will be our next mission in this review on phonemes. Well, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to see you again next time. Have a wonderful day.